Several years back, I developed a handout which I used at events and speaking engagements around Southern California. It was called 7 Things Your Group Can Do. At the time, I was working with groups as varied as school groups, church groups, and industry groups, as well as environmental groups. So they weren't all activists, and most of them knew nothing about transition towns. Now, Hopkins and the transition towns were forming groups from scratch, uniting people around the transition concept. But I thought, why not begin with pre-existing groups? Everyone is going to have to change in this great turning, so we might as well get started. So I went out to pre-existing groups where people were already gathered, people already trusted each other. These were people who cared enough about the environment to have called me in to speak. To me, that said that they'd opened the door to change. I narrowed it down to 7 things that these pre-existing groups could do to shift direction, to shift perspective, basically to facilitate Macy's shift in consciousness. The first of these was to acknowledge the full extent of the problems. I'm talking about the big umbrella problems of the Great Unraveling, the climate crisis, biocapacity, economic unraveling, and disenfranchisement. A community that's progressive is undoubtedly already aware of climate change. They may be aware we have some problems with the economy, but they probably have no clue how deep those problems run. However, biocapacity is beyond the awareness of most Americans, and disenfranchisement has been so politicized that it's dissolved into opinions. Do you believe it's a problem or not? It's been divorced from statistical facts. People don't understand how disenfranchisement undermines social stability, that we can't achieve stability without fixing it. So the first task within any group is to coax them to wrap their mind around the full set of problems and their interrelated nature. Secondly, I challenge them to rethink this idea of normal. Just like we uncovered in the biocapacity unit of this class, a level of consumption that developed nations currently call quote-unquote normal is far from normal within the ecosystems of the planet. The very word normal gets in our way. It sounds so normal that it doesn't occur to people to question it. So sometimes simply calling people's attention to that, reminding them that this doesn't fit with what you've shown them about biocapacity, is enough to get the ball rolling to cause questions to enter their minds. But that's the goal here, to get people to think differently. Third, I encourage people to strive for resilience. I'd explain the little guy on the trampoline. I'd use some of Hopkins' definitions. An easy starting place was getting the group to join in buy local campaigns. Many people had heard about these campaigns and they understood this was somehow good. But even environmentally minded people didn't understand how essential it was. So I'd explain why it was important to keep the local economy alive, to help it flourish. I'd help them understand that local was our safety net as the massive systems fracture or crumble. In this course, you can refer to the Economic Solutions Unit for resources on relocalization. Fourth, I'd encourage groups to create culture change. I'd challenge them to make low carbon, post-petroleum, low consumption the way that they do things within their group. Depending on what the group was about, this would be where we could talk about using cloth napkins, reusable dishes, composting food waste, carpooling, things like that. But I'd tie each one of those into one or more of the big umbrella problems while helping people see that we need to go much, much deeper than a fluffy light green in order to reach for a livable future. I'd encourage them to use peer encouragement, peer pressure to applaud the right stuff. When people see their friends doing something, they're more likely to join in. So leveraging these social impulses towards sustainability-oriented behavior. Fifth, I'd encourage them to install the infrastructure we need for the Great Turning. These would be carbon-free, oil-free community assets, like building out the commons. For younger people, that might mean hands-on building projects like building community food gardens or building cob structures. For older people, that might mean hiring someone to come install rainwater harvesting barrels. For businesses, that might be encouraging them to install bike racks. Pre-existing community groups are also a great place to set up some of the sharing solutions, such as time banks, tool lending libraries, local harvest swaps. All of these fall within Macy's creating new structures. Sixth, we talk about imagination. In order to move into a brighter future, we have to first imagine it so that we can go there. Hopkins gives several imagination-stimulating games in the Transition Handbook. I've used these verbatim, questions and all, right out of the book with LA groups. In his book, From What Is to What If, he describes group games and exercises, although he doesn't lay it out in a how-to format. In this course, I covered imagination in economic solutions under the practical tool Redefining Success. Lastly, I'd encourage them to cultivate community connections. In all likelihood, a pre-existing group has already been doing this. They probably already have a foundation of friendship and a decent working relationship regarding the project they originally formed around. But it's important to value them, to understand that these connections are really important. Remember the principle of revaluation. Navigating the Great Turning is going to demand closer relationships, more intimate and trusting relationships than what Americans are currently accustomed to. We'll need the kind of relationships which can support inner resilience to help people navigate crises that are every bit as massive as COVID. We need psychological support and spiritual support which can guide us through all of that. So, whether the group is centered around a book club or a garden club or a circle focused on decreasing their carbon emissions, you can help each of these groups by encouraging them to think in terms of these 7 points. Help them figure out how to continue what they already formed their group around, but to do it within the context of the Great Turning.